Most U-boats never even made it to surrender. Some were deliberately sunk by their own crews. Others vanished during secret Allied experiments. And a few ended up inspiring the submarines that shaped the Cold War. And the craziest part? The world still doesn't agree on how many U-boats actually survived. So let's go back to those final chaotic days when Germany tried to erase its own fleet from history, and why some of them still survived in museums to this day. When the war ended and the steel wolves of the Kriegsmarine faded into memory, but two submarines refused to sink into history. U-505, a type IXC, had already lived an unbelievable story. On June 4, 1944, it became the first enemy vessel boarded and captured at sea by the U.S. Navy since 1815. Task Group 22.3, led by Captain Daniel Gallery, hauled the submarine nearly 2,500 miles to Bermuda. Why? Because they discovered intact Enigma codebooks and machinery that proved extremely useful to Allied code-breaking. After the war, the Navy no longer needed the scarred, leaking submarine, and in 1954, it was donated to Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry. Today, you can walk its 252-foot hull, peer into the cramped 48-man quarters, and stand where Commander Halrut Longe surrendered his boat rather than drown with it. Meanwhile, another popular U-boat was captured near Norway. U-995, a type VIIC-41, delivered in September 1943, survived Arctic patrols under Oberleutnant Xerxes Hans Georg Hess. After Germany's collapse, Norway took the boat as war reparations and operated it as Kora until 1965. That year, the German Navy League purchased the submarine for a symbolic price of 1 German mark and brought it home. The Royal Norwegian Navy first offered it to the West German government for that same price, but they saw it as an insult. By 1971, U-995 set on the shore at Leboe, beneath the towering Naval Memorial, transformed into a walk-through museum. Visitors stepped through its pressure hull, still marked with rust scars from polar patrols, standing inside one of the last fully intact German U-boats left on Earth. But that explains what happened to only 2 of these U-boats. There were around 1,000 of them at sea. What did Germany do with all of them after the war ended? Well, most of these submarines weren't as lucky as the U-505 and the U-995. Before we move on to the next section, please don't forget to subscribe if you've liked the video so far. Before the famous Operation Deadlight, which we'll talk about later, there was another German and very secretive organization of the same name. Basically, as they sensed the war was coming to an end, Germany started Operation Regenbogen, a full-scale scrapping operation to destroy their dominating U-boats. When the Third Reich collapsed in early May of 1945, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, Hitler's designated successor and the longtime commander of the U-boat arm, issued one final order to the submarine fleet. It was to begin scuttling the U-boat fleet to make sure the superior boats never fell into enemy hands. It began quietly on May 1, 1945, when 3 U-boats were wrecked at Warnemünde, as crews began destroying their pens and machinery rather than face capture. The next day, on the 2nd of May, another wave hit Travemünde, where some 32 boats were deliberately scuttled. And on May 3rd, the pattern accelerated. Crews wrecked about 39 more boats, including 32 at Kiel and 7 at Hamburg, even as Admiral Dönitz dispatched his chief aide, von Friedeburg, to open talks with Montgomery at Lüneburg. By May 4th, the Allies made clear that naval units must be surrendered intact. Despite that, 4 more submarines went down that day as charges and open Kingston valves did their work. In the early hours of May 5th, Dönitz briefly authorized Operation Regenbogen, an order to scuttle the fleet, only to countermand it minutes later to avoid jeopardizing surrender negotiations led by Eisenhower and Montgomery. Even so, Crews destroyed roughly 87 boats on May 5th before the halt took effect. There were a few sinkings on May 6th, but on May 7th, 2 experimental Walter boats were wrecked at Cuxhaven. Then, on May 8, 1945, the German Instrument of Surrender took effect, signed in rhymes and formalized across the Allies, and the remaining submarines, about 150 of them, were handed over for examination, scrapping, or internment. By the week's end, historians estimate around 195 U-boats had been lost to the scuttling, with some saying that number to be much higher. So what did the British do to the German U-boats after the Nazis surrendered? They practically did the same thing, just under a different name. For roughly 150 surviving U-boats, the Allies had a different plan. The destruction the Nazis started during the war's final week was chaotic, so the Allies wanted a controlled, methodical end to the fleet. That's why they created Operation Deadlight, a British-led mission that essentially continued the scuttling the Germans had begun under Operation Regenbogen. The only difference? Now it was planned, documented, and executed under Allied flags. The operation began in November 1945 and was centered off the northwest coast of Northern Ireland, with submarines towed from Loch Ryan in Scotland and Lofoyle in Northern Ireland to 3 designated deepwater disposal zones about 100 to 120 nautical miles offshore. Many of the boats were already in terrible shape. Crews had sabotaged machinery, storm damage had set in, and some sank under tow before reaching the scuttling grounds. Between November 17, 1945 and February 11, 1946, the Royal Navy sent 116 U-boats to the bottom, using a mix of gunfire, explosive charges, and aerial torpedoes. Still, a handful of U-boats remain. However, these were considered spoils of the victors and split among the winners, and you won't believe what happened to them. Want to understand the world better? Start with history and subscribe to our channel. In June 1945, representatives from the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union formed the Tripartite Naval Commission, the TNC, in Berlin to decide how to divide this technological spoils heap. The commission agreed on a simple plan. Each nation would receive a carefully selected sample of boats for testing, while the bulk of the fleet would be destroyed under Operation Deadlight. The Americans showed the most interest in the Type 21 Electroboot, whose submerged speed of 17 knots stunned Allied engineers. They took U-2513 and U-3008, both commissioned in late 1944. The U.S. Navy operated them into 1945, with U-2513 even making headlines when President Harry Truman stood on its conning tower during a deep dive demonstration off Key West. While the Americans were too busy showing off, the British claimed several boats as well, among which were the U-190 and the U-2326. They were using them for anti-submarine training at Gosport until 1947. At the same time, Soviet Russia had a different problem. They were eager to reserve their technological lag. In order to achieve this, they got their hands on at least 4 Type 21s and 4 Type 23s, recommissioning them as in-class and using them to design their first post-war submarines, including the Project 613 Whiskey class. By 1947, the division was complete. Fewer than a dozen U-boats lived on under new flags, their hulls becoming laboratories that shaped Cold War submarine warfare. The rest, more than 100, vanished beneath the Atlantic, their secrets studied, copied, and then deliberately buried. That said, all of these ships were far too valuable to be kept in service only. The Allies used them as the experimental bed, which gave birth to the more dangerous and modern U-boats. Just like the Germans studied the Dutch for their famous World War I U-boats that devastated the seas, the Nazi U-boats that the Allies captured and studied gave birth to some of the most spectacular new submarine technology. The captured German submarines became floating classrooms. When American, British, and Soviet engineers stepped inside the hulls of Type 21 and Type 23 U-boats in mid-1945, they found a vision of the future. These submarines had streamlined bodies, snorkels that allowed diesel running underwater, hydraulic torpedo doors, and batteries nearly twice the capacity of Allied designs. The Americans were stunned by the U-2513 and U-3008, and within months, these boats were being tested at Key West and New London. Their influence appeared almost immediately in the Guppy program, the greater underwater propulsion power conversions of U.S. Navy's Gato and Balao class boats. The Type 21, or Electroboot, aka electric boat, was unlike any Allied boat in service during the war. Its hydrodynamic hull was designed for continuous submerged operations, not merely diving to escape detection. It carried 372 battery cells, nearly triple the capacity of an American Balalo class, giving it the unheard-of ability to stay submerged for 2 to 3 days at slow speed. Even more startling was its underwater sprint, 17 knots submerged, faster than most Allied submarines could travel on the surface. Not wanting to lag behind the Americans, the British followed a similar path with their A-class modernization, soon evolving into the Porpoise class of the mid-1950s, the Royal Navy's first truly modern, quiet diesel electric submarines. But no nation absorbed German knowledge more forcefully than the Soviet Union. The Type 21 became the blueprint for Project 613, known in NATO terms as the Whiskey class, launched in 1951. More than 200 Whiskey-class boats were eventually built, making it one of the largest submarine classes ever produced. Its successor, the Zulu class, Project 611, also drew on German hydrodynamics and internal layouts. Every modern submarine, from early Cold War diesel boats to the first nuclear-powered attack subs, carried DNA that could be traced directly back to those late-war German hulls. The U-boat fleet, defeated at sea, ultimately reshaped underwater warfare for generations. Do you think marine warfare would be completely different today if the Germans had scuttled all their U-boats? Let us know in the comments below. Here's another video history buffs enjoyed watching. Goodbye for now.